I like fishing probably more than anything else in this world. Besides my wife, and my kids, and my dog, fishing is the next best thing ever. And grew up spin fishing, and when I was about 15 years old, I was introduced to the fly rod. And then the problem happened. Every single one of us have that problem. So it's nice to be among friends, people that understand what I'm talking about. And started fishing. Most of my fly fishing when I was younger, we fished the Provo. I live in Orem. I grew up in Orem, went to Orem High School. Most of my fly fishing was either on the Provo River with everybody else in the world. But then I'd fish quite a bit up on Stillwater. And I loved fishing strawberry. When I was a kid, we'd go up there and just beat on fish with worms and cheese and other sorts of unethical, horrible things. But it was a lot of fun. Learn what fish did, learn fish behavior, stuff like that. So started really fishing Stillwater quite a bit. And I like Stillwater for the simple fact that the fish are bigger and there's more of them. And so, you know, as I've continued forward in my fishing life, I'm a big fish junkie. And anything that's big and nasty and mean and would just as soon take a bite out of me as anything else is the kind of fish that I like to look for. So we figured, you know, just the regular evolution that happens when you do that is you get to a point where you're fishing streamers kind of exclusively because big fish eat little fish and all that stuff. So as this continued to evolve and I got a job and I realized that jobs are great because you can go fish in more places and you got money. And so we started running around all over the place. My best friend and I fish a lot down in Mexico now. He's not here, he's usually running around with me. His name's Raymond Zabriskie, Dr. Z, and he and I do a lot of stuff together. He's a pretty energetic guy, he's fun to listen to. The guy is probably the best fisherman I've ever been around in my life. Seldomly I out fishing, you know how that goes. But one of the things that I noticed when we began fishing and catching big, gigantic saltwater fish down in Mexico, I went down there in 2000 for the first time and catching dorado and mahi tuna and things like that, fishing a lot of here. And I said, well, why doesn't anybody ever fly fish for these things? And the first look was, what the heck is fly fishing? The second thought is, well, you can't land these fish on a fly rod very well. They're too big, they're too strong, they're too powerful. But fly fishing has changed a lot since I first picked it up, and probably even more so since most of you guys picked it up. It's no longer just a 5-weight floating line, and it's so different. 5-weight rods and floating lines are still the standard. You know, we can buy any rod we want, any line, and any configuration. We buy the reels that will actually stop giant fish. And so as the technology changed, I began to pack my fly rod down there and fish more and more with my fly rod and less with the conventional rod. I mean, after the first couple of years, I was hooked, addicted even more. One of the things that frustrated me the very most is catching fish on flies that are something along, you know, that size kind of stuff. Can't even really see it right there. I mean, you guys can see it right there. That's about a 6-inch, 7-inch long fly. It looks like a mullet or a sardine pattern. And the thing is, to get the profile of that fly, first of all, it's really, really, really difficult to find a fly hook that will fish correctly, that you can tie correctly. And the other thing that I knew, and I'm a plumber by trade and kind of got an engineering brain, and the thing that frustrated me the very most is, obviously, if I'm going to tie something that big on a fly hook, it's got to be a 4X or 5XL extra long shank hook and stuff like that. So I'm going to get this fish to eat, and it's going to hook up, and then immediately what's going to happen, if you remember back to the 7th grade science class, you got that fulcrum and lever thing going on, you know, as we do that. So that fish is hooked up. And these are not fish that you just pull in by your hand. You've got to have a reel, you've got to have some drag. So the longer that fish fought, and the longer it fought, and the longer it used its jaw as the fulcrum, and the leverage of the hook, and the 150 or 200 yards of backing that was out as you're trying to get that fish to come back, it would eventually work itself loose and it would pop off. So I knew that tube flies existed, and that guys in Europe fished them almost exclusively, often for salmon. And I began to think that it would be a good idea to tie something on a tube, a fly on a tube. So I began experimenting with it and making up with it. Well, amongst this travel also, we build up these flies and we put these epoxy heads, and you know, you're talking the saltwater flies, probably a 30 or 45 minute tie, and it's beautiful. And the first fish with big nasty teeth shreds the heck out of it, and there's the end of the fly. We convinced ourselves for a number of years that it was worth it. But then as we began to think about, you know, donating a 45-minute tie to one fish, then there's a fish called a Pacific needlefish, which is an awesome fish, but that thing destroys flies, and it's not the thing we're looking for. So I began to think, why not tie these things onto a tube? So I started monkeying around with tubes and stuff like that. You know, need to spend some more money, buy a tube vise adapter. I couldn't find one that worked really good, as the tube went into the fly vise, tighten the head down, and I still have to build these epoxy heads. And the better epoxy you use, the longer it took to dry, but then if it wasn't perfect, it didn't swim right, then the epoxy would yellow, and things like this. That took care of the problems of the hook and the gate and the rusting of the hook and how big of a hook I needed to use. But it didn't really work as well as I wanted to. So I began to think, why not make a tube with a head already on it? And that would be easy to do, right? So the very worst thing that you can ever do in your life is think something will be easy. But a couple years later, I ended up learning about injection molds and plastics and more stuff that I ever thought of. And what I basically came up with was this concept right here, which is a tube with a head already on it, as you can see. I decided to make them out of optical grade polycarbonate, so the light would transfer through and they're UV and all that kind of stuff. And what we ended up doing is, we made 5 or 6 different sizes of heads. That one's shaped kind of like a bullet. And then we made some that have like a popper front on. And what it ended up doing is it replaced having to build these big epoxy heads. It made them a heck of a lot more consistent. And we could tie these flies and these profiles on a tube system that worked very well. And then we could change hooks, so I can fish something with a hook that's as small as something like that right there. Let me see that's a relatively little guy. You know, it's probably a 4. Something as big as a 4 or 5/0 on the same exact fly. Then when my fish size changes, I don't have to change my fly per se. I can match the hatch, so to speak, with what I need to, but I can change the hook size to also match the size of the fish that I'm catching. So we built a bunch of prototypes, went down and decided that we were going to try it out down in the Baja. So went down and to see what would happen. We caught 30-something species of fish on it in the first 6 or 8 months. Everything from Mexico stuff all the way to Alaska stuff. We've taken all 5 species of Pacific salmon, steelhead, to anything that you can think of in the Sea of Cortez, from Dorado to, we've caught some weird fish, trumpet fish, tuna, caught a lot of tuna, caught a lot of rooster fish on it, and stuff like that. So obviously the system worked. So then I thought we're gonna make it so that it would work to fish for trout. So everybody in the world, that's a long story short, everybody in the world will fish that thing right there this time of year, right? Some simple, basic black bunny leech. I'm going to show you how to tie one on this system. It's called the Weapon, and go ahead and just tie one up. It looks very much like that, but we'll fish completely different, because I'm not going to have the long shank like that. Some of the other thing that I came up with was a very inexpensive way to put it into a vise that would work well. It wouldn't cost a bunch of money. Retail on a vise adapter right here that I sell is $10. Pretty nice thing. I tie on a Renzetti vise, clamp it in there, it works great. So I'm going to put that vise adapter on my vise, and the nice thing about that is I can still use the rotary feature. I'm going to slide the tube into that vise adapter and crank it down. One thing that's quite different with this than any other tube is I can tie on it. Some of those pins and needles and other vise adapters, they're difficult and irritating to tie with. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, for this particular fly, I'm going to get some O3O lead so I can make sure I get it down. I'm going to put 10 wraps of lead right onto the tube. Something that's different about tying on a tube as compared to tying on a hook.
Pull your vise this way a little bit. Beautiful. Something
that's a little bit different with tying on a tube instead of a hook is there's no barb. Those of you that tie understand what that means. I don't know where. But after a while, you begin to realize the links of it and stuff like that. It takes a couple minutes to get used to it a few flies. But anyway, I'm going to throw on on some, that's 030, I think. He had 8 or 10 wraps so I can get it down. This particular tube is made out of polycarbonate. What that means is that it sinks, it doesn't float. That's a long story short. I'm going to go ahead and wrap and just tie that, make that lead really anchor it down a little bit and make it really solid. Another nice thing about streamers, especially trout streamers, is you use big stuff. All I want is basically a profile more than anything else. So I'm just going to wrap. I'm going to build up some thread towards the end of the thread so I can wrap it up so it just makes it clean when I finish it off. Just lash that thing down real good. Come off my excess. Many of you probably know this, but I'm just going to mention it again. When we're tying bunny leeches and things like that, cross cut and zonker cut makes a big difference on how the fly lays down. Zonker cut is cut straight down the rabbit, so if you're petting the rabbit or petting the cat, it's cut that way. Whereas cross cut's cut sideways and the hair lays completely different. What I usually do is I'll take a nice piece of black bunny leech or bunny strip, and I'll get a piece about the length of the shank of the hook. Now again, remember we don't got a hook here, but we know about what that number 2 or number 4 for it. So I'm going to measure it out and lash that thing down onto the tube itself. Just going to lash it down a little bit. That's going to be my tail. Just going to get it lashed down really good. And I'm going to cut that tube off because I want that thing to lay back and just as like I said, it's rubber effect around. Then I'm going to get a piece of crosscut. How many of you guys have had trouble figuring out how to tie crosscut in? Or I used to tie it, and sometimes it would look like buckwheat just got up out of bed and it would be all fluffy and stuff like that. The best way of figuring out how to tie that in is the fur needs to go back towards the back of the hook or towards the back of the vise. So if you look at it, it's going to turn on like that because it's going to lay down when I wrap it over the top of itself. So I'm just going to take some of that stuff there, grab the corner of it, and lash it down. Break my thread. Lash it down real good. And I'm not going to put any flash or anything in this, so I just want to show the basic example of this fly. And bring my thread, advance my thread up to the front of where the head would be. Then I'm going to take this zonker and I'm just going to wrap it, palm right forward, so it lays down good. And it's going to build, see how that profile is laying down, it's laying down flat. That's depending on which way the grain of the fur, I guess, is going on the fly. I'm just going to wrap it around, tie it down, put it that front. Now I can finish it off, I can put a big collar on it or a small collar on it, whatever. Go ahead and lash that thing down. One thing that you'll notice is I'm not worried about banging my knuckles on a hook. That's another advantage. I didn't ever think of that, but it just kind of happened that way. So I don't have to put it in place. So I would cut that off, lash it down a couple more times, put a whip finish on it. That's about the fastest and easiest bunny leech I think there is in the world to tie. It's extremely, extremely effective. You can throw some glue on it if you want to. Don't have to. Nothing in the world sticks better to super glue than polycarbonate. I'll tell you that right now. Stick on it. So anyway, there's the completed fly as it's sitting there. Now I've got this tube that's really long. All of the tubes, because of the way they're manufactured, are 2 3/4 long. Doesn't matter what size the head is. It's just the way the mold is built and things like that. So I've got this fly and I've got this long tube. It's on the back end of it, as you can see still. I take a tuning cutter and I'll actually cut the tube off the length that I want it to. So now that it's cut off, you can see that the profile of that fly, if I stick it back into the vise, the profile of that fly now looks just like a regular old bunny strip or whatever else. I can throw some flash in it, I can change my thread color, I can make the collar a different color, or whatever else, but that's overall. It's a pretty simple fly, but overall what the important thing is that I've got this tube sitting in there. So if you think about it, I'm going to show you on one of these slides right here, as it's cut off, and every one of the packages of the stuff that I sell, it comes in packs of 5 on the smaller heads like that. It also comes with a short piece of junction tubing. You see, it's just a piece of clear vinyl tubing. And so how to rig it, you're going to run your leader down through the body of the fly, all the way down to the end, run your leader out here, tie whatever terminal tackle knot you want to tie onto your hook down there, and then when you pull it and snug it tight, it's in there. One of the other advantages is you can leave the hook clear at the back, so when you're getting short strikes all the time, fish are getting a nice mouthful of hook instead of a mouthful of tail. Helps a lot on the larger profile flies. I can cut that tube to whatever length I want. Even after I've cut it, and it may be too short or too long, I can add another piece of junction tube to get my hook back as far as I want or up as close as I want. The fish are just slamming flies or bait, the bait fish up at the front of the thing. I can put my hook clear to the front. But again, as I stated before, if I'm fishing for fish that I don't need the gape of anything bigger than a 10 or a 12 or whatever size hook, I can put that hook on. Or if all of a sudden Mr. Dorado or Marlin who weighs 80 pounds is eating something that's the same size, I don't have to tie another fly. I can match the hatch because I've got it there, and I can change out my hook pretty quickly to be something that's a little more applicable to a bigger fish immediately. Another huge advantage of it is, especially in the saltwater, is the salt rust. Salt chews hooks like nobody's business, and so a lot of these flies have fished multiple trips and caught multiple fish, and we're saving flies. It doesn't mean that we tie any less flies, and we all know how that is because we're always looking for the next magic thing, right? But our flies have a tendency to last a lot longer for that reason. Another thing that happens is immediately upon hookup, back to that discussion about 7th grade science class, immediately upon hookup, the fish will hammer it. I mean, we know how fish do, right? And the first thing they do is they hit it and then they open their mouth and try to throw it. If the hook is stuck, and it's stuck good because it's got a short shank, we're basically fishing with a scud hook or an egg hook or something like that. But the fly and the hook separate, which is a tremendous advantage when you're fishing with something toothy, because we're fishing for something that's toothy, because the fly doesn't get destroyed by the fish. It slides on off the line and it gets saved and things like that, and we take advantage. Again, the question is, well, I'm going to tie, to myself, I was like, well, I'm going to tie 5 or 6 flies, right? Because I'll never need another fly now. I can still tie a ton of flies and things like that, because that's what we do. There's a particular amount of enjoyment in tying a fly. But the flies have a tendency to last longer, so when we've got that one fly that's working really good and it happens to be the last one in our box, it's nice to be able to make it last a little longer. We've done a lot of other different things with the patterns. I'm going to tie another one just so you can watch the process again while I'm talking. We've done a lot of other things with the patterns. This is a 1/4 inch head. The next size up is a 3/8 head. And one of my very favorite flies I tie on the weapon for freshwater. And like I mentioned, this plastic is polycarbonate. It sinks barely. It's a little bit heavier than freshwater. We'll make them out of polypropylene. And the nice thing about polypropylene is it's lighter than water, so it can't sink. So we have developed some pretty deadly mouse patterns that don't sink. And the nice thing about that is we can tie a fly, a mouse pattern, that looks so much more realistic with fur and feathers and whatever else we end up using that undulates and moves so much more. And until I put enough material on that fly to overcome the displacement of water that the plastic head is doing, it's going to float forever. And throw a piece of foam on the top of it or something like that, and you've got a major water disrupting gigantic mouse pattern that never sinks and never gets destroyed. Because fish crush it, and the hook and the fly separate and end up catching fish. Plus we're hooked up with the right kind of hook. I mean, if I'm tying a mouse that's 2.5, 3 inches long, and let's say the fish are not huge, but they're 14-inch cutthroats, and let's say I want to fish them with a 12 or a 10 hook. I'll just tie a 12 or a 10 scud hook onto the end of it, and I'm not damaging fish's mouths, and when they go up and just destroy it at nighttime, I'm not damaging my fly. Then when Mr. Big Brother Brown shows up, we can make an adjustment pretty easily with that. So again, thinking about hook shank and length and stuff like that, I've got my lead wrapped on. We want a nice zone cut tail. I'm going to do this one a little bit different. Just use a different color thread, wrap it in, wrap that tail on there pretty good. Same thing. And I mean, I know this isn't like earth-shattering news, not, you know, crazy, difficult fly pattern. It's the concept more than anything, how to tie it. The nice thing about wrapping your shank all the way up and things like that is you get that nice underbelly color. I know John talks about fishing to energize the bunny a lot, and how valuable that undercolor is to a fish. You can see it, the stuff moves around. Often I'll throw a couple of pieces of flash in the tail. Just throw some in there. Not a big flash guy, but sometimes it really helps. And then, like I said, one of the other nice advantages, unforeseen advantages, was not having to deal with the point of that steam hook all the time. My cross cut, the face backwards. Advance my thread forward. Just go ahead and wrap that big palmer right up. This one's going to end up having a little orange hot spot on it because I'm going to tie it off with some orange thread. So a little bit different look on that fly as well. Still basically the same pattern, things like that, a little different. How many of you guys like throwing articulated stuff? I love it because that means big fish, right? So something that dawned on me after this thing existed for a while was taking, I'm going to show you on this, so taking a fly like this and cutting that thing nice and short, and having an arsenal of a whole bunch of different colors of flies and running a line through both ends of them. Running a line through both of the flies. And what you get basically out of that is, because of the nature of the head and things like that, as the fly is tied and the hook is put on the back fly, I've got a ball and socket point basically right there, and I've got some pretty serious articulation. The other nice thing about that is, let's say the fish decide that they want to concentrate on olive and black. How long does it take me to make an olive and black fly, articulated fly, when I got 10 olives and 10 blacks or whatever else? So I can change and adapt my colors and things like that immediately inside the middle of it. You know, and very often I'll tie that second fly, or the second one, the articulation, something like with one of the fluorescent orange. And let me grab my light so you can see just how much this stuff, I mean, that was something I was pretty proud of about the whole thing, as we decided to make the decision to use UV plastic optical grade polycarbonate. It's the same kind of stuff that the guys use in their aerodocks. So the light transfer on the thing is just unbelievable. It basically looks like a what do they call that stuff? The stuff that they send light pulses down for communications and stuff. Same kind of thing. So it transfers down the tube pretty well. So picks up the sunlight, picks up whatever light that there is. We make the product in on the polycarbonate right now in 5 colors. It's black, orange, chartreuse, clear, and pink. And the pink is almost like a, I don't know, coconut pink. It's more reddish than it is pink, but definitely a great fly, also tying on white and things like that. So that's the system. Like I said, I'm just a fisherman that had an idea and decided to see it through to the end of the process. But it's been a whole heck of a lot of fun. The product's called the Weapon. One decision that I made aside from the cheesy name, Raymond wasn't really a fan of the name at first, but I said, well, it's kind of like the banjo minnow. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, I don't know, what's the banjo minnow? And he said, I don't know, but I remember the name of the infomercial. So that's what he called on. So we weaponize our patterns, weaponize mouse, weaponize bleach pattern, things like that. We've tied a lot of dry flies on. It's a pretty butt-kicking salmon fly too, especially when it's tied on something that floats. Polypropylene that floats along. More a grasshopper pattern. We fished it on the green quite a bit as a cicada. There's a small beetle. Fished a lot of high mountain streams with it. Tied really small patterns and super small hooks. But it was a lot of fun. But I was going to say the other decision that I made way back at the very beginning is it's made in the U.S. I didn't want to send it out of the country. I figured I could do it. I could make it American made. And that was important to me. And so from the idea that came in my brain to the place that I get it shot, it's right in the United States, and I think that makes a big difference. So I enjoy keeping the money and the attitude here. Let me just rig one real quick. I'll rig one that's just normally tied, and then I'll rig it articulated. So here's some of my favorite stuff in the world, big heavy tippet. Some 2X. So I've just got my 2X tippet. And I'm just gonna, it's on the end of my line and tie my terminal knot. I'm gonna run it down through the center of the weapon. Right? And again, I need that little piece of junction tube. I'm gonna steal one off of here. So I've got that. What I usually do is I'll put the junction tubing on the fly itself when I'm finished tying it, so it's ready to fish. I'm not fumbling around with it when I'm actually getting down there. So there's a piece, if you can see it. There's a piece of the weapon with a piece of the junction tubing actually on the end of it. In the product, I sell it with 5 inches of junction tubing. So you can cut them off and add them on there. Then I'm going to take my tippet material or whatever I'm fishing, my leader, whatever, and I'm going to run it down through the weapon, so it's run all the way down through it. Then I'm just going to tie a basic terminal tackle knot, an improved clinch knot or whatever. So I'm just going to go ahead and tie improved clinch knot. Okay, turn my tag end off or whatever we're going to do. And then I'm going to snug it up and pull that hook into the back of the tube. See, that one's pretty long. You can see how it looks just the same bend as a streamer hook. Except the advantage is that we've got a short shank on it, so there's no leverage advantage to the fish as it's fighting. So that fish comes up, decides it wants to short strike that fly, and gets a big old mouthful of hook, and then there's a separation, just like that. So I'm fighting the fish on a short shank hook. We all know how effective that is if we nymph or fish scuds or other small hooks and stuff like that. We don't pop them off a whole lot that way. And I can finish it up, and I'm back in business. I slide the fly back on there, put it right back onto the tube, and there I'm ready to fish again. Same thing. So that makes sense?
That makes sense. Thank you. The eye of the hook goes into that tube,
yep.
And that's it?
Yep. So I use Daiichi X150 steelhead hooks because the eye is very big because people are used to fishing. And you can buy those clear down to 8s, I think, and they'll fit. It'll secure itself in that. And yeah, the eye does go in there, and the hook itself, just like on a regular fly, anytime we're stripping something, tends to act as a keel to keep the fly running straight and correctly, especially if it's a pattern that we're not tying in around. It's actually a bait fish pattern. It's color specific as to how it sits in the water.
It fits in snug enough that it can't really rotate.
Yep, it stays snug. And again, one of those advantages that wasn't perceived to start with, but cold water has a tendency to keep that vinyl nice and tight and stuff like that. The tube itself stays rigid enough that even in 80-degree tropical water, it doesn't ever collapse or move or anything like that. So it keeps that profile in the water. The other nice thing about doing it out of polycarbonate, kind of the nerdy science side of it though, is that it hangs neutrally buoyant in the water. So when it's tied correctly and as we wrap the lead and stuff like that. One of the challenges with cone heads and things like that, they get down and stuff like that, but their swimming motion is often like that. So we try to compensate that by wrapping lead on the hook. But we can tie this stuff right there, and it basically hangs neutrally buoyant in the water. And I've sat and watched fish, you know how trout will chase, and then if you stop on that pause, I mean, they hammer stuff. And very often when we're fishing a heavy fly or something like that, when there's the pause and the fly dives down, fish is like, that's not food. But this just hangs neutral, just like a bait fish. And I get a lot of it. That's right there. Anyway, that's probably about all I got, is if anybody has any other questions or things like that. Basic system. Like I said, you're welcome to flip the lights on and come up here and take a look at some of this other stuff. But I'm absolutely sure that fly right there has got multiple rooster fish. It's got, see that head on that thing? It's got a popper head. That thing displaces some serious water and causes quite the motion. A lot of fun. We'll tie mice on stuff like that. It's a great system. Not the greatest for everything, but